Greetings, friends and countrymen. Welcome to Conspiracy Corner News, episode 34. This is Bart Sabrell. Conspiracy Corner News briefly highlights the week's most significant and underreported news events throughout the world, focusing on special preparation for the difficult times ahead for all mankind. And that's what we're going to talk about today. If you're studying the economy, and some people might even call it end times revelations, you may know that throughout history, the majority has always been wrong. The majority thought the earth was flat when it was round. The majority thought bleeding an illness out of you would cause you a cure, and they were wrong. And in regard to conspiracy theories, we won't go into detail. The majority believes one thing, and it's later proven 50, 100 years later that the opposite is true. Even though the stock market may be going up, in fact, if we watch it here, it's going a little bit down today, but it's pretty high because after the Brexit, it was below, I believe, 17,000 on the Dow, below 10 on the New York Stock Exchange, and the Nasdaq was below 5. All of those have recovered quite substantially. And what you have to understand is throughout history, both with the 2008 crisis and the 1929 crisis in the stock market, which was the big Great Depression that lasted almost a dozen years, right before these events happened, the stock market went up really high. Now, I believe the reason for that is that the billionaires and trillionaires who influence the stock market naturally want to sell their stocks at the highest possible point, and then after a crash come in and buy everything for pennies on the dollar. And that is what they have done throughout history over and over again, going back to the Revolutionary War here in America as well as in France. And so the fact that the stock market is even up beyond the Brexit is some indication that I believe these people are running it up and about to, sell all of their stock for cash so they can buy practical supplies, and then the crash will occur. Mac Salvo is one of the best writers on the economy. He says that the economy is due to crash. In fact, he calls it a banking crisis. I think Germany's largest bank had their share prices drop by more than 90% in the last few weeks. And, there are naysayers, as there were before, says, I don't know what else you need to see. A lot of people are asking, where's the collapse? Where's the crisis? He says it's happening all over the world. Social unrest, strife, a banking crisis that has nowhere to go but worse. The chickens are coming home to a freaking roost. And he goes on to say, I've no doubt that the banking crisis is about to sweep the globe. There's going to be a moment of reckoning. Peter Schiff, who also talks about the economy on my home journal of the Sleuth Journal, says to expect an economic crisis infinitely worse than 2008. And he goes on, I'll put links in the bottom of the description of the YouTube video for you to read more. But basically, it has to do with the dollar. Also, practically, we have over 300 million people living in the country of the United States, and 100 million of them are not working. Now, you could say, well, they're too old or too young, but these are people who could work, and they skew the statistics to make the economy look as rosy as possible. But the fact is, the unemployment rate is really about a third, and 50 million of the people, which is 1/6, are on food stamps. Now, that has to do with the dollar, and this is one of the interesting statistics that only he reported, and, it's really strange it's not being reported in the mainstream media. He says here in the highlighted area, 10 years ago, 75% of all global trade was in the U.S. dollar. Today, that number is around 37% and dropping like a rock. So when the dollar crashes, then, the world economy is going to crash, and it's going to be a pretty difficult time. Some believe worse than the Great Depression of 1929 that went all the way through to the early 1940s. If you're not a subscriber of Ready Nutrition, I highly recommend it. A colleague of mine wrote this great book called The Prepper's Blueprint, which I also highly recommend that you get. And she noted that riot control gear sales are soaring globally. Now, this is pretty interesting. You know, if rain gear, umbrellas and rain boots and raincoats were suddenly, going up 1,000% in sales, you would expect a rainy season to be coming. So the fact that riot control gear sales are soaring is probably an indication that the higher ups in the government and their, counterparts in the private sector. Oh, I didn't turn off my phone. That's my wife calling. Give me one moment here. All right, I'm sorry I had to take that call. It's very, very important about what laundry detergent to buy. And in any case, so here's another article you might want to take note of. And most people in the alternate or alternative media already know about this. Obama's government caught buying 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition. And even members of Congress, asked the department, remember, this is the Department of Homeland Security, not international security, Homeland Security. So they recently bought enough ammunition to shoot every American 5 times. Again, why would they be buying riot gear and ammunition for homeland use unless they really thought they were going to use it? Now, there's a lot of people out there who count themselves Christians who say that, God will take care of me during the crisis. But Jesus also said when he was tempted to jump off of a cliff by the devil, and the devil said, the scriptures and Psalms say that the angels will protect you, Jesus countered by saying, do not test the Lord your God. Now, this is a scripture from Genesis 41, starting in verse 17. Pharaoh had a dream. He's the world leader at the time, and Joseph was his soon-to-be second in command, a follower of the true creator of the universe. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I stood on the bank of a river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt or thin, such ugliness as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the gaunt or very thin and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten up them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly or thin as at the beginning. So I awoke. Also I saw my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on the stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians. This is the king talking about his non-believing pagan, consultants. But there was no one who could explain the dream to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. So even though the king is secular, because he influences so many people, God is with him. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh, a non-believer, what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following it, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which shall be in the land of Egypt in the future, that the land may not perish during the upcoming famine. So basically what this is saying is that God does provide for you, and often it is by foretelling what the coming events are going to be. For example, there were 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph was told this by the dream that Pharaoh had, and so during the 7 years of plenty, he stockpiled supplies for the coming 7 years of famine. God did not mysteriously drop down from heaven the supplies to feed everybody during the 7 years of famine, but he still provided it by giving foreknowledge of that event, and then Joseph acted upon the prophecy. So I believe, both from people who are secular and both from people who are theological, that there are times of imminent famine, food shortages, economic collapse, and who knows what else coming in the near future. Now the question is, if there was a worldwide catastrophe, how many minutes would it be before your local grocery store was completely depleted? I would say, maybe 30 minutes. And then what would you do? If the power grid went down for various reasons, that means there could be no electricity to pump gasoline out of the storage tanks into the trucks to deliver the food, which means there would be no food. How much food do you have in your cupboard? How much water do you have? Do you have flashlights and batteries? Do you have extra medicine if you need it? All these things are good to have even if you don't use them. For example, in your car, when you drive with the good tire technology that we have, there's probably only a likelihood of about 1 out of every 1,500 trips that you're going to have a flat tire. Nevertheless, even though it's 1 out of 1,500, some would consider it foolhardy not to have an inflated spare and a jack and a flashlight and so forth, even though it's a 1 out of 1,500 chance. I would say economic collapse, tribulation, whatever you want to call it, there's at least a 1 out of 3 chance, if not greater, that is coming down the pike in the very near future. So this is just a reminder to check your supplies, to start thinking what to do in the event of an emergency, to provide for yourself, for your friends and family, and what to do then. This has been Brother Bart's Conspiracy Corner News, episode 34. And more importantly, are you prepared for eternity? Please tell your friends, share the link, give me a YouTube thumbs up if you like this video. Check out my new Facebook fan page linked in the description of this video. Like it if you like it, and be sure to read the full Sleuth Journal article on this topic, also linked in the description of this video. And most of all, thank you for your kind and generous support. Greetings, friends and countrymen. Welcome to Conspiracy Corner News, episode 34. This is Bart Sabrell. Conspiracy Corner News briefly highlights the week's most significant and underreported news events throughout the world, focusing on special preparation for the difficult times ahead for all mankind. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Stock market naturally want to sell their stocks at the highest possible point, and then after a crash come in and buy everything for pennies on the dollar. And that is what they have done throughout history over and over again, going back to the Revolutionary War and here in America as well as in France. And so the fact that the stock market is even up beyond the Brexit is the majority believes one thing and it's later proven 50, 100 years later that the opposite is true. Even though the stock market may be going up, in fact, if we watch it here, it's going a little bit down today, but it's pretty high because after the Brexit, it was below, I believe, 17,000 on the Dow, below 10 on the New York Stock Exchange, and the Nasdaq was below 5. All of those have recovered quite substantially. And if you're studying the economy, and some people might even call it end times revelations, you may know that throughout history, the majority has always been wrong. The majority thought the earth was flat when it was round. The majority thought bleeding an illness out of you would cause your cure, and they were wrong. And in regard to conspiracy theories, we won't go into detail. And what you have to understand is throughout history, both with the 2008 crisis and the 1929 crisis in the stock market, which was the big Great Depression that lasted almost a dozen years. Right before these events happened, the stock market went up really high. Now, I believe the reason for that is that the billionaires and trillionaires who influenced the stock